Jaden Cole thought he could outsmart Detective Maira Holt, believing his arrogance and cunning would keep him one step ahead. But when Ethan Warren was found dead, poisoned in a way that left no trace, Jaden's game of manipulation quickly turned into a fight for his own freedom. As the investigation closed in on him, Jaden's smug confidence began to crack, revealing a chilling truth. He had underestimated Maira, and in doing so, had sealed his fate. In the quiet town of Millwood, a sense of peace had always enveloped the community. Nestled between rolling hills and small country roads, it was a place where neighbors knew each other by name, and the most exciting event was often the annual county fair. People moved at a slower pace, and the most crime the police department typically dealt with were minor incidents like petty thefts or traffic violations. However, this idyllic calm was violently shattered one fateful evening when Ethan Warren, a 17-year-old high school senior, was found murdered in his home. The initial call came in just after 10 p.m. The caller was a neighbor who had heard a series of loud noises coming from Ethan's house, followed by an eerie silence. The police arrived at the scene within minutes, their sirens cutting through the stillness of the night. The house was eerily quiet as officers cautiously approached the front door, which was slightly ajar. Inside, they were met with a disturbing sight. Ethan's lifeless body sprawled across the living room floor. There were no signs of forced entry, no windows broken, and no obvious signs of a struggle. What was even more unsettling was the expression frozen on Ethan's face. His wide eyes, filled with fear and confusion, looked almost as though he had been shocked or caught in the middle of something he didn't expect. It was as if the life had been violently ripped from him in an instant, and the gruesome nature of his death left behind a chilling aura. But the most perplexing detail was the small folded note that had been carefully placed on Ethan's chest, right above his heart. The words were written in a neat, almost precise handwriting, though the message itself was bizarre and chilling. "You will never catch me." The scene was quickly secured by the police, and the crime scene investigation unit was called in. Detective Maira Holt, a veteran investigator known for her keen attention to detail and ability to read between the lines, was assigned to the case. As she arrived at the scene, the gravity of the situation hit her. The note was a taunt, a challenge, a puzzle left behind by someone who clearly wanted to play a game with the authorities. Ethan's murder was no random act of violence. It was deliberate, calculated, and it sent a clear message. Maira carefully surveyed the room, noting the lack of evidence of a break-in. There were no signs of a struggle, and Ethan's personal belongings were undisturbed. His phone was lying on the coffee table, unlocked and seemingly untouched. This suggested that the killer had either been someone Ethan knew or someone who had deliberately planned the murder to avoid leaving a trail of evidence behind. The more Maira thought about it, the more the case seemed like a puzzle. A puzzle with no obvious clues and a killer who had gone to great lengths to avoid detection. Maira's mind began to race as she considered the possibilities. Who would want to kill a seemingly ordinary teenager from a quiet town? Who would leave such a taunting message, daring the police to find them? The lack of physical evidence left her with few leads, but one thing was certain: Ethan's murder was no ordinary case. It was the work of someone who believed they could outwit the authorities, someone who was playing a dangerous game. As the night wore on, the town's residents began to stir. The news of the murder spread quickly, and soon, everyone in Millwood was talking about it. Ethan had been well liked at school, a quiet but friendly kid who kept to himself. No one could fathom who would want to hurt him. His parents, devastated by the news, were in a state of shock. They had no idea who would want to harm their son, and they were no help in providing any leads for the investigation. With every passing minute, the pressure on Maira mounted. The case had already begun to feel like a race against time. Whoever had killed Ethan was clearly someone who knew how to cover their tracks and had left behind only the faintest of clues. But Maira was determined. She had solved many complex cases in the past, and this one would be no different. The taunting note was a message, but it was also a mistake. Whoever had killed Ethan thought they were invincible, but Maira knew that every criminal, no matter how clever they were, always made a mistake. She just had to find it before the killer slipped through her fingers. Detective Maira Holt spent the next few days poring over the evidence, or rather the lack of it. Every inch of Ethan's house had been combed through, but it all seemed too clean. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, and no unusual traces of evidence that would lead them to the killer. The only clue was the note, a strange, cryptic message that mocked the police and hinted at a game being played. Maira's instincts told her that the person responsible for Ethan's death was someone who believed they were too smart to be caught. But who could it be? She turned her attention to Ethan's life outside the home. Ethan had been a quiet teenager, a senior in high school, with no known enemies. He wasn't the type to get into trouble or have conflicts with others. Maira decided to speak with Ethan's friends and family, hoping to uncover something that could point her in the right direction. As she sifted through his social media profiles and interviewed those closest to him, one name kept coming up: Jaden Cole. Jaden was another 17-year-old student at the same high school as Ethan, known for his rebellious attitude and penchant for testing the limits. While Ethan had been known as a calm, well-mannered student, Jaden was the opposite. He had a reputation for being arrogant and often flaunted his ability to outsmart authority figures, whether it was teachers, parents, or the police. It didn't take long for Maira to learn that Jaden and Ethan had clashed a few times at school, but nothing serious enough to indicate a motive for murder. Still, Maira couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Jaden might know something more than he was letting on. Jaden's attitude made him an interesting subject of focus. He was cool under pressure, seemingly unshaken by the investigation, and even appeared indifferent when questioned by the police. Maira had read his file. Jaden's behavior had been increasingly erratic over the past year. He was involved in a few minor incidents like shoplifting and skipping school, but nothing that would have raised alarms to the point of violent crime. The more Maira observed him, the more she got the sense that Jaden was not someone who feared the consequences of his actions. He had a look in his eyes, one that suggested he enjoyed being in control, enjoying the manipulation of others. But was that enough to make him a killer? The breakthrough came when Maira learned that Jaden had been seen near Ethan's house the night of the murder. According to a neighbor, Jaden had been walking down the street around the time the crime was believed to have occurred. Jaden, however, insisted that he had been at home alone, playing video games in his room. There was no alibi, and the police couldn't find any proof that he had been anywhere else. His story didn't add up, but without concrete evidence, Maira was forced to continue digging. Jaden's nonchalant demeanor only added to the growing suspicion that he was involved. He had a tendency to boast about how clever he was, often bragging about outsmarting others, especially authority figures. His arrogance was palpable, and it seemed as though he thought he could talk his way out of anything. Maira had dealt with her fair share of smug criminals, but Jaden's confidence was different. It was as if he believed that he had already won, that the police were playing into his hands. He seemed to enjoy the attention, toying with the investigators, like a cat with a mouse. Still, there was no solid evidence to charge him, and Maira knew better than to jump to conclusions. Despite her gut feeling that Jaden was hiding something, she couldn't make an arrest based on suspicion alone. As much as she disliked it, the case was at a standstill. But that didn't stop Maira from watching Jaden closely. She knew that, in time, the truth would come to light. If Jaden was involved, he would slip up eventually. He might be arrogant, but no one was perfect. Detective Holt was determined to expose him for what he truly was, a killer who thought he could outsmart the very system meant to catch him. She had seen it happen before, and she knew it would happen again. It was only a matter of time before Jaden's arrogance caught up with him. As the investigation into Ethan Warren's murder continued, Detective Maira Holt found herself growing increasingly frustrated. Every lead seemed to hit a dead end, and every conversation with those who knew Ethan revealed nothing that could explain why he had been murdered. But there was something about Jaden Cole that gnawed at her. His arrogant demeanor, his confidence in the face of suspicion, it all pointed to something deeper, something more dangerous. Maira couldn't shake the feeling that Jaden was hiding something, and it became clear to her that his attitude was not just a defense mechanism. It was a shield, a way to deflect attention from the truth. Jaden had been a prime suspect almost, from the moment his name surfaced, but he was proving to be a difficult puzzle to solve. Whenever Maira and her team questioned him, he responded with practiced indifference. He seemed to enjoy the game, reveling in the idea that he was outsmarting the authorities. His responses to their questions were carefully calculated, as though he were playing a mental chess game, always thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead. He didn't show fear or anxiety, the usual signs a suspect would exhibit under pressure. Instead, he was cool, almost too cool. Maira observed him closely. He was always the first to volunteer an explanation, and his answers were quick, rehearsed, and without hesitation. It was as if he had anticipated the questions, already prepared for the interrogation. This level of composure was unsettling. It was almost as though Jaden had planned every word, every move. Maira had dealt with enough criminals to know that those who appeared too confident were often the ones hiding the most. But what was Jaden hiding? The more Maira dug into his past, the more she discovered that Jaden had a history of manipulation. He wasn't just rebellious. He enjoyed the power he had over others. Teachers at his school had mentioned how he often pushed boundaries, testing authority in subtle but clever ways. His arrogance wasn't just a teenage phase. It was ingrained in him, a trait he had cultivated over time. But did that mean he was capable of murder? Was it possible that Jaden saw Ethan's death as just another game, a way to prove his superiority? As Maira continued her investigation, she started to notice patterns in Jaden's behavior that she hadn't caught before. His answers to questions were often vague, avoiding specifics and offering generalities. When asked about his whereabouts the night of Ethan's murder, Jaden had claimed he was home, playing video games alone. But his story lacked any real detail, and he didn't seem at all concerned when asked about possible witnesses. In fact, he almost seemed bored by the questions, as if he believed the police had nothing on him. His arrogance was becoming more and more evident, and it frustrated Maira to no end. The breakthrough came when Maira revisited the autopsy report. She had been so focused on the lack of physical evidence that she had overlooked one crucial detail: the cause of death. Ethan had been poisoned. The initial reports had suggested a blunt force trauma or a sharp object, but further examination revealed traces of a rare poison in his system. This was no ordinary murder. It was a calculated, deliberate act. The poison had been administered in a way that was almost undetectable, a sophisticated method that suggested the killer had knowledge of toxic substances. Maira's heart raced as she connected the dots. Jaden's arrogance, his ability to stay calm under pressure, and his history of manipulating those around him, all of it pointed to one possibility. Jaden had killed Ethan, but he had done so in a way that left no obvious trace. Poison was the perfect weapon for someone who wanted to remain unseen, someone who wanted to control the situation from a distance. Jaden's confidence had led him to believe that he could get away with murder, but the poison had left behind a telltale sign, one that Maira was now certain would lead her to him. As the investigation continued, Maira began to piece together more evidence linking Jaden to the crime. She discovered that he had recently researched toxic substances at the local library and had made several online purchases under a fake name. His online history was full of searches about poisons, how to administer them, and how to avoid detection. It was clear now that Jaden had been preparing for this moment, planning Ethan's death in a cold, methodical way. He had outsmarted everyone, except Maira. Despite the mounting evidence, Jaden remained unfazed. He continued to act as if nothing had changed, his arrogance still shining through. But Maira knew that his cockiness would be his downfall. The more Jaden tried to control the narrative, the more he exposed his own guilt. The investigation was far from over, but Maira was beginning to close in on her suspect. Jaden had thought he could outsmart her, but he had underestimated one crucial factor. Detective Maira Holt was just as clever, and she wouldn't stop until she had the truth. Detective Maira Holt felt a surge of anticipation as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The discovery of the rare poison in Ethan Warren's system had been a game-changer. It had been an overlooked detail in the initial investigation, one that could easily have been missed. But now, with the knowledge that Ethan's death had been caused by poison, Maira's focus shifted entirely. The killer wasn't just someone with a motive. It was someone with the knowledge and confidence to use a weapon so subtle, so undetectable. The more she uncovered, the more it became clear. Jaden Cole was at the center of this web, and his arrogance was beginning to unravel. The breakthrough had been significant, but Maira knew that this wasn't enough to make a solid case. Poison was tricky. It could leave little evidence behind, and many toxic substances were difficult to trace unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. To make matters worse, there was no direct evidence linking Jaden to the scene of the crime. No fingerprints, no physical trace, just a gut feeling and a mounting list of circumstantial evidence. But for Maira, circumstantial evidence had led her to the truth many times before, and she was determined to let it lead her to Jaden this time as well. Maira spent long hours reviewing Jaden's activities, combing through every detail of his life that might tie him to the crime. His digital footprint was a key focus. He had been careful in his online activities, using fake names and browsing through encrypted websites. But even the most meticulous criminal often leaves a trail behind. Maira had her team pull up Jaden's internet history, and it didn't take long to find a series of searches on rare poisons, substances that could kill without a trace, compounds that could be ingested without suspicion. Most importantly, there were several purchases made under a false name, one of which was for the very poison found in Ethan's system. The pieces fit together perfectly, and Maira's heart raced as she realized just how close she was to capturing him. Jaden had been meticulous, but he had made a critical mistake. He had underestimated the ability of the police to track his online activity, and now his confidence was working against him. Maira knew that, despite his arrogance, Jaden was still just a 17-year-old teenager, and teenagers often think they are invincible. He had thought that he could outsmart the detectives, outplay them at their own game. But Maira was about to prove that his arrogance had blinded him to the one thing he had overlooked. The evidence was there, and it was undeniable. Maira's next step was to confront Jaden, but she knew that this wouldn't be a typical interrogation. Jaden's arrogance would make him difficult to crack, and his calm demeanor meant he was likely to continue lying, trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage. Maira would have to be strategic, to use his own ego against him. She needed him to believe that the police had no clue what they were doing, that he still had the upper hand. If he believed that, he might slip up, might reveal something that would break his carefully crafted facade. The confrontation took place in the same sterile, cold room where Maira had interrogated him before. Jaden walked in with the same swagger he had shown during their previous encounters, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his hoodie. He leaned back in his chair, staring at Maira with a smirk on his face. He had no idea that the game was about to turn on him. Maira kept her expression neutral, watching him carefully. She didn't rush the conversation. She let the silence stretch between them, letting Jaden feel the pressure. His smirk faltered slightly as Maira began to speak, her voice calm and measured. She talked about the poison, about the research he had done, and about the purchases he had made. She mentioned the fake name he had used, the trail of evidence that had led straight to him. But she never once directly accused him. Instead, she let the evidence speak for itself, letting Jaden fill in the gaps with his own words. At first, Jaden tried to maintain his composure, dismissing Maira's words. With a laugh and a shrug, he acted as though he had nothing to hide, as though the police had no real evidence. But as the interrogation wore on, Maira could see cracks forming in his armor. His responses became less certain, his smugness replaced by an increasing sense of discomfort. It was subtle, but it was there. The more Maira spoke, the more Jaden's confidence seemed to wane. He had believed that his arrogance would protect him, but now it was starting to work against him. It was when Maira mentioned the rare poison, the one that had killed Ethan, that Jaden's composure finally broke. His eyes flickered, his fingers twitched. For the briefest moment, he looked like a cornered animal, desperate to find a way out. But it was too late. Maira had him. The evidence was irrefutable, and Jaden knew it. His arrogance had led him to believe he could outsmart the police, but now it was clear. He had underestimated Detective Maira Holt. The game was over. Jaden Cole sat in the interrogation room, the weight of the evidence pressing down on him with a suffocating force. His earlier confidence had dissolved, leaving behind a thin veneer of defiance that barely masked the cracks in his resolve. Detective. Maira Holt had played her cards perfectly, giving him just enough space to think he could escape, but slowly tightening the noose with every word she spoke. His bravado had faltered, and now, in the silence that followed her revelation of the poison, he was left with nothing but the reality of his own actions. Jaden had believed that he could outsmart the system, but now he knew he had made a fatal miscalculation. The rare poison, the one that had killed Ethan, had been linked directly to him. The digital trail, the fake name he had used, the research on poisons, it was all there, too clear to deny. And yet, even now, he tried to maintain an air of detachment, as though the truth would somehow slip through his fingers if he didn't acknowledge it directly. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, a slight smirk lingering on his face. But Maira could see the strain beneath his calm exterior. "You know, Jaden," Maira said softly, her tone steady and controlled. "You're not as clever as you think you are. You thought you could pull this off, didn't you? That you could get away with murder. But you've left a trail, a very clear trail. The poison, the purchases, your online activity, it all points to you. You can't run from this anymore." Jaden's eyes flickered for a moment, his gaze darting to the table, then back to Maira. For the first time since their conversation began, there was a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. He had been playing a game, a dangerous game. But now, the rules were changing, and he was losing. "You think you've won?" Jaden finally muttered, his voice quieter than before. "You think you have all the answers, but you don't. You don't know everything." Maira leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "I know enough. I know you poisoned Ethan because you thought you could control him. You thought you could show everyone that you were smarter, that you were above it all. But in the end, you were just another person who made a mistake." Jaden scoffed, trying to regain some of his composure. "You don't know me. You don't know what it's like to be in my shoes. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted to win. I wanted to prove that I was better than everyone. Ethan was just a pawn. He was in my way." Maira's expression remained stoic, but inside, she felt a wave of disgust. Jaden's words revealed his true nature, a young man driven by an insatiable need for superiority, willing to go to any lengths to assert his dominance. Ethan's life had meant nothing. To him, just another obstacle in his path. The coldness of his reasoning sent a chill through the room. This wasn't just a crime of passion or rage. It was calculated, methodical, and cruel. Jaden continued, his voice rising in anger. "You don't understand. Nobody understands. You all just think I'm some arrogant kid, but you have no idea what it's like to be constantly told you're not good enough, to be treated like you don't matter. Ethan thought he was better than me. He thought he could just walk around and have everything handed to him. But I had to work for everything. I had to be smarter than everyone, and I was. I was the one who had it all figured out. And now look. At me. He laughed bitterly, as if the weight of the situation was beginning to sink in. Now I'm sitting here, and you're about to take everything from me. Maira studied him carefully, watching the shift in his demeanor. His bravado was starting to crumble, his emotions flickering beneath the surface. This was the real Jaden, not the cocky, untouchable teenager he had been pretending to be. The mask had slipped, and for the first time, he seemed to realize the enormity of what he had done. The realization that he was about to lose everything, the freedom he had fought so hard to protect, the life he had taken for granted, was beginning to dawn on him. You had all the chances in the world, Jaden, Maira said, her voice soft but firm. You had the opportunity to make something of yourself, to be better than this. But instead, you chose to kill. You chose to take a life just to prove a point. And now, you have to face the consequences. Jaden remained silent for a long moment. His eyes glazed over as he processed her words. For the first time, he looked truly defeated, as if he was no longer playing the game. His shoulders slumped, and his hands trembled slightly. It was a far cry from the cocky teenager who had thought he could outwit the detectives. Finally, Jaden broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never thought it would happen like this. Maira didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence in the room spoke volumes. Jaden had believed that he could control everything, but in the end, he had lost control of himself. The consequences of his actions were inevitable. His arrogance had led him to take a life, and now it would be the thing that brought him down. As the interrogation continued, Jaden's resolve began to weaken. He no longer fought to maintain his innocence. He just wanted it to be over. Maira knew that the battle was won. Jaden had underestimated the truth, and now he would have to face it. The arrogant 17-year-old who thought he could outsmart everyone had been caught in his own web, and there was no escaping the consequences. Detective Maira Holt had proven that no one, no matter how clever they thought they were, could escape justice.